The following program is presented by the Far East Broadcasting Company because stories of people living out the gospel with their lives inspire all of us. FEBC, taking Christ to the world through radio and new media. Learn more at FEBC.org.
We're so thrilled. Here, look, he's coming in. He sees us. He's rescue at last. And I look back at that today and I think, Lord, I'm yours. I see that plane coming for me. Back then, I think of the Lord that's coming for me.
On this Memorial Day weekend, a first-person story of men who sacrificed their lives in service to their country. Welcome, I'm Wayne Shepherd, and we're going to replay a conversation from a few years ago when we spoke with Edgar Harrell. He died 3 years ago at age 96, but at the time of his death, he was the oldest living survivor of the sinking of the USS Indianapolis. He and a few other survivors had spent 4.5 days in the shark-infested oil-slick waters of the Pacific, while the Navy had no idea the ship had been sunk. The backstory is that the Indianapolis was given a secret mission to deliver the atomic bombs to an air base in the Pacific. As a young Marine, Edgar Harrell was assigned to guard the crates, although he didn't know what was inside. After completing the delivery, his ship was sunk by the Japanese, and 72 years later, back in 2017, it was announced that the Indianapolis was finally found 18,000 feet below the surface. Although Corporal Harrell survived, hundreds of men didn't, and he told us the story.
I grew up as a country boy in Kentucky during the Depression. I had older, younger sister and 6 younger brothers when I went into the Marine Corps in 1943.
Were you a farming family? What did your dad do?
Yes, farming, and so I grew up on the farm. I knew how to work.
So the war comes along, and how old are you, and what made you, did you sign up?
Yes, I volunteered for service. Actually, I had a deferment with my granddad. He wanted me to help put out the crop because we were in what was the Tennessee Valley Authority project that they were putting a dam on the Tennessee River, and so they're taking all the farmland.
Mm-hmm.
And my granddad said, Ed, why don't you stay with me the last summer and help put out a crop before they moved us out. And
so you enlisted at how old?
I was 18 years old. As an 18-year-old boy, we were hearing all about the war in the Pacific, and many, many boys were losing their lives. And I tell my dad, I want to get in the Marine Corps. Yes, we were patriotic very much as a family, and so here I am in the Marine Corps, and then they send me to San Diego for boot camp, and I got through boot camp. They said, you're going to go to sea school. Well, what's sea school? And I needed schooling, and so...
Not too many oceans in Kentucky, are there?
No, and... So anyway, I think after 6 weeks of sea schooling then, they sent me up to San Francisco, and they said, you'll catch a large combatant ship. Well, I got up there, and I guess, there's no large combatant ship, and I kind of served some guard duty at what they call Yerba Burma Island for some of our own boys that kind of got in a little trouble, maybe for, I don't know, a couple of weeks or so, and then one day they said, you're going down to the dock in San Francisco, and there was the Indianapolis. And so that's to be my home then for the rest of the war.
Was there a mission before delivering the atomic bombs? Was there a mission that happened before
yes. That? Okay, I'll go aboard probably maybe in March of 44, and we were right in the middle of combat. The Indianapolis had already had 4 battle stars, so to speak, and I joined them. And my first combat was, we talk in Kwajalein Islands, and then I was at Sampan, Tinian, Guam, Sea Battle of the Philippine Seas, where we shot down, our task force shot down, I think it's 403 enemy aircraft that day. And then from there, we were down at Palu. Then I was at Iwo Jima. I was at Okinawa, 3 air strikes on Tokyo. And lastly, then I was a Marine Guard that guarded Fat Man and Little Boy, the components of the 2 atomic bombs that later would be dropped at Nagasaki and Hiroshima.
We'll get to that part of the story in a few minutes, but I'm just astounded. All that experience, all that battle experience. I mean, you're young. And you're going through that. Do you remember those feelings? Do you remember being frightened, or what were the feelings you had?
I'm not naive to think that I didn't consider it, but I think I had in mind that, I'm trained to do a job aboard ship. I'm still trained to man 5-inch guns and 40-millimeter guns, and had the honor of serving as Captain McVeigh's orderly. So I'm busy, and there's not time, to look inwardly, I guess. And,
you were just doing a job.
Yeah, I'm doing a job.
Wow.
And I was at peace with myself, feeling that I'm contributing anyhow. And
Mr. Harrell, before we go any further, I got to ask you about what you're wearing on your coat pocket here. Tell me about this medal here.
Well, the Indianapolis, I think, achieved 10 battle stars, but 6 of them was after I came aboard. So I'm wearing the bronze and the silver there, which represent 1 and 5, or 6 in total. And then I guess I've got one would be Marine Corps, one would be a Pacific Theater, one would be combat, and then later, this gets way ahead of our story, but later, because of miscarriage of justice on the part of the Navy and the court-martial of a good captain, because of that, we were awarded was a Navy commendation and the Presidential Unit Citation.
Okay.
So
is that the one on the very top there that I see?
One of those,
yeah,
right.
Yeah. All right, so you find yourself on the USS Indianapolis. It's World War II. You've seen battle, and now comes that fateful trip into the Pacific, carrying those crates with those. Did you know what was in those crates?
No. We had been at Okinawa, and there we received a kamikaze plane. We lost, I believe we lost 9 boys. Several were injured, and a big gaping hole all the way through the ship. And we had to come back to the States for repair. All of a sudden, one morning, we saw that we were getting ready to do something other what. I looked out on the dock, and there was a lot of Navy, Marine brass.
Not your normal stevedores there, huh?
Yeah, and we noticed a big crate out there, and, that didn't bother us much, but then we saw our big crane reach over and get that and put it on the quarterdeck. And my Marine captain said, "Harold, I want you to station a guard in the port hangar deck." Well, what we have, Captain Park? He said, "We don't know. Don't know why we're guarding?" He said, "No, we don't know. The skipper of the ship doesn't know." I looked at that big crate, and I can see it today. When you see the screws that fastened that together, they were countersunk and waxed over. And that, kind of looked a little odd.
They didn't want anybody messing with it, did they?
Yeah. And then there was a couple of proposed to be Navy or Air Force. Our Air Force officers that came aboard. They had Air Force uniforms. And we thought that's odd, And then we saw that they had a little metal cage-like crate, padlock on it, and they set that on the quarterdeck, and a couple of sailors had an iron rod, and they kind of put that in that, put it on their shoulders, and they take it up to the forward area to a stateroom, and Captain Park said, "Harold, I want you to station the guard on the outside of the hatch." And okay, so I stationed a guard there, and momentarily then there was a couple of sailors that came up with something like a blowtorch or welding torch, and they fastened a piece of metal to the deck over that crate and down on the other side. They were not going to lose that. And we were told that anything happened to the ship, whatever happens, don't allow this to get lost. So that tells us that we got a hot potato anyhow. Now I guess we are ready to get on the way. It was on the 16th of July, 1945. Now we're going to head, as we were told, to Tinian Island, some 5,300 miles. With a cargo, we don't know what we have.
You were actually guarding the crates that held the atomic bombs.
We had 2 guards that were guarding the big crate in the port hangar deck and the outside of the hatch that goes into an unused one of Admiral Spruance's cabins, and those two men were in there. And so now we get underway, and we have some 5,300 miles to go to Tinian Island. We understood, in fact, my Marine captain said, the only thing that we are suspicious of is the fact that they tell us that every hour that we delay will cost lives.
Really?
I mean, anyone knows that, you got a hot potato if that's the case, but I might say that the big explosion at White Sands Desert had not been set off yet. In fact, it was set off that morning, and the story is told, and I don't know how much factual truth behind it, but that as we were going under the Golden Gate Bridge with our cargo, that had that explosion, which happened nearly at that precise time, had it not been successful, we would not have made the voyage. Now, there was only a few that knew what we had.
So that's
and
how
of course,
critical.
Those two men aboard were scientists from Los Alamos.
I see.
And they knew what they had, and they knew what was in the big crate.
We'll continue to talk with Edgar Harrell, a survivor of the USS Indianapolis, coming up on First Person. Here's Ed Cannon on the Vision for FEBC's weekly podcast.
The primary purpose of Until All Have Heard, of course, is to share the experience that FEBC has because we have staff on the ground in so many oppressive places. But in addition to that, we're trying to speak to you in a way that only the kind of testimonies you'll hear from around the globe can do.
Discover how the gospel is making a difference around the world. Search for Until All Have Heard on your favorite podcast platform, or hear it online at febc.org. On this Memorial Day edition of First Person, my guest is Edgar Harrell, a World War II survivor of the USS Indianapolis that was sunk by the Japanese. He continues his story.
3 days then out of Guam, sure enough, sub was out there. Commander Hoshimoto was waiting somewhat at the crossroads. He hadn't been successful in getting a combatant ship the whole war, and so he was eager. And he surmised that all he would have to do is just wait, and sooner or later someone would oblige. We have no underwater sound gear. He does. And he could put his little periscope up, and he picked us up, let's say, 10 miles out. And so, anyway, he announced to his crew to, load 6 torpedoes. The first one cut the bow of the ship off. When I said he cut the bow of the ship off, I was there. I know. I was sleeping under the barrels of number 1 turret. And I would surmise that 35, 40 feet of the bow, that long, sleek bow, was actually cut off. And being cut off, it was cut off all the way down, which is nearly 3 decks deep.
You saw that with your own eyes.
I saw it to the extent that I'm close enough that I can say, the bow, there's no more bow there. It's off. It's about 35 feet wide at that point. And then the second torpedo's back close to the marine compartment, and no doubt a big gaping hole there, but no one lived to tell about that because all the water that rushed in, if you were there, you were wiped out. I realized immediately that the bow is off, and you could hear the bulkheads breaking because here we're moving, say, 17 knots or like 15 miles an hour, and all that water is coming in, and it coming in, you hear the bulkheads breaking and so on. And I could hear the death blow, and I realized that I've got to get back to midship and preparing to go back. All I've got is a blanket, and I got out of that blanket. I still have my clothing on. I'm sleeping in my clothing. And as I started aft, there were those that were coming out of the forward area on the main deck, and that was more officers' quarters. And as many of those officers were coming out, you could see that they were in their night clothing, maybe just a pair of skivvies, and many of them were flash burned, and in some cases the flesh was hanging off their arms and off their body, and they're pleading for someone to help them. But I knew that I'm to make my way to the quarterdeck to receive orders from my Marine lieutenant. Now, normal times, if we're in combat, that's what you do. Anytime you in combat, you go to your prepared station, and received orders to do. So before I get to the quarterdeck, now I realize that I don't have a cape jacket. It's down in my locker. And
does that serve like a life preserver?
Yeah, it's
okay.
Yeah, oftentimes I say it's like a horse collar made out of kapok as a flotation device that you wear as a vest.
Huh.
But mine was in my locker, and I get to the quarterdeck. I asked Lieutenant Stahl for permission to cut down a new supply of kapok jackets hanging up on the deck, and he said not until we get word to abandon ship. Well, the ship is sinking even by now. If you can visualize that on the quarterdeck, normally on the starboard side, we would be 8 feet above waterline, but the ship is listing even now so much to the starboard, there's water on the quarterdeck. And then I saw a Navy commander come through the hatch, and as I saw him come through, I recognized who he was. And he was flash burned, and some sailor hollered out, "Get the commander a life jacket." So they began to cut those down, and I managed to reach in and get me a life jacket and put it on like a vest.
So the ship is going down, and you managed to snag a life jacket, but you find yourself in the water. How many men were on board that ship?
Okay, there were 1,197 men aboard.
Just 3 short of 1,200
Right.
men. And how many do you think were thrown into the water who survived the initial torpedoes?
We surmise that when word trickled down to abandon ship, I made my way to the port side, the high side, and looked out into the blackness of the night and looked out into that, they said it was a half-inch of oil on the water. And we surmise that maybe 900 boys maybe abandoned ship and left the ship. If that is the case, then maybe 300 were drowned nearly immediately below, or they didn't get off the ship. Those that got off, then we're going to be out there 4.5 days, and I recall that I hung on to that rail looking out into the blackness of the night, knowing that this may be the end of life. And I stepped over the rail after I said my prayers. Now, I'll tell you, I felt somehow, some way, the assurance that I'm going to make it. Now, I didn't know I was going to be out there, 5 days, but I felt that the Lord was speaking to me through his word. I'll never leave you nor forsake you. Peace I give unto you, not as the world give I give unto you, but let not your hearts be troubled. Don't be afraid. Well, I can't say that I wasn't afraid, but I really felt confident that I'm going to make it. Now, certainly I had no thought of being out there 4.5 days. So
But you knew those scriptures.
Yes, I knew those scriptures.
So you knew the Lord, you loved the Lord.
And I like to say that the Lord spoke to me. Now, I didn't see any, visage or anything of the Lord or anything, but immediately as I prayed, I know that the Lord just brought those scriptures to mind. I'll never leave you nor forsake you, and I want to say thank you, Lord, and, peace I give unto you. Well, anyway, I leave the ship, swim out then to some bodies out there, maybe about 80 of us. There's 2 other Marines. Many of them didn't have kapok jackets, and, of course, the other big thing that we had after the first day was sharks. And many boys would be mauled by sharks the next.
You circled up in the water, and you'd see men disappear as they were tugged under by the sharks?
Oh, yes. Yeah, many times. But you could imagine if you see big dorsal fins cutting through the water all around, maybe 60, 80 boys in some then maybe had drank some salt water, or maybe they had swallowed some salt water, and then they're beginning to hallucinate, and all of a sudden they surmise that they see an oasis out there, and they're going to swim out to their imaginary oasis, and they leave the group, and you hear a blood-curdling scream, and you look, and you see that kapok jacket go under, and after a little bit, like a fish cork, it brings the body back up. You dare not to go out there because you see all kinds of fins coming around the blood, and it's sometime later before you maybe ever come up to that body and really check to see who it might be and take off maybe his dog tags. And so that's going to happen many, many times. By the second day, if you could just imagine you're swimming in 110-degree weather, bareheaded, and you're so thirsty. Not only are you swimming, but the temperature too. And we would see boys maybe tear off some of their clothing and strain some of the salt water and drink a little bit and try to tell you that it's not bad, it's 85-degree water or so, and it's wet, and but within the hour, you begin to see what's taking place. Mm-hmm. They begin to lose it, and they even could become your enemy, thinking that you have a hidden canteen of water in your cape jacket, and maybe they would take out their sheath knife and stab a buddy, and then the more blood and so on. I think different ones says, any of you can pray. We've got to pray that we aren't going to make it. There's only 17 of us. So we had a prayer meeting.
Is that right?
And
what was that like?
Well, it's pouring out your heart to the Lord. And I recall this one boy, God, if you're out there, I don't want to die. I've got a son back home that I've never seen. And so he was praying. He may not have known in person the Lord that he was praying to, but he certainly was praying. And any of us that would pray audibly would be asked to pray, and various things of their families back home and so on. Everyone, it was the hope that we had of making it, and the families, it was a calling card, for us to pray and desire to go home. But
let me break in here and say that soon after that prayer meeting, a plane appeared, a plane not even looking for survivors since the Navy didn't know the ship had gone down. However, in God's timing, the pilot of that plane happened to notice something shining on the ocean surface, which led to the rescue. Time doesn't permit us to tell the whole story today. It's in Mr. Harrell's book, but let me return to our conversation as I ask him if he ever thinks about the moment of that rescue.
I look back at that, and here we're just, we're so thrilled. Here, look, he's coming in. He sees us. He's some rescue at last. And I look back at that today, and I think, Lord, I'm yours. I gave my heart and life to you back August the 1st, 1943, and you were with me through those years, and I see that plane coming for me. Back then, I think of the Lord that's coming for me one of these days, and I expect the Lord to come. I really thought that the Lord would come in my life, and as I look at our world today, I'm still convinced that He's on His way, and He could be here at any time.
He may come during your lifetime.
He may come during my life.
Even so, come Lord Jesus.
Even so, come Lord Jesus.
Thank you for your service. So many men didn't come home from that war, but God brought you through it. We're so happy you did, and we do thank you sincerely for your service for our country and your service for our Lord all these years.
Fine. Thank you, sir. It's been a delight to be with you today.
As I mentioned at the start of this first-person interview, Edgar Harrell went home to heaven in May of 2021. At the time, he was the oldest living survivor of the sinking of the USS Indianapolis. As we observe Memorial Day, we give thanks to all those who gave their lives in defense of our country. This first-person interview was made possible by the Far East Broadcasting Company. To thank FEBC, please visit the website febc.org and look for the podcast Until All Have Heard, featuring FEBC President Ed Cannon. You'll hear how God is using FEBC programs around the world to tell many the good news of Jesus Christ. Again, go to febc.org. Now, with thanks to my friend and producer Joe Carlson, I'm Wayne Shepherd. Join us next time for First Person.